Hello, everybody. I'm excited to introduce Jasmin Joseph to you. Jasmin is a writer and researcher from Yonkers, New York. I ran across an article she wrote on intergenerational trauma and was immediately taken by what she had to say. As you know, intergenerational trauma is what happens when trauma that's experienced by people in one generation gets passed down to their children and their children's children, and so on. In this article, she talked about how she suddenly realized that she too was a product of intergenerational trauma and decided to seek therapy because of it. I know so many people who could benefit from therapy or coaching and yet won't seek it out. What was it about Jasmin that got her past feeling stuck? I wanted to know more and invited her to the podcast. She accepted, and here is Jasmin. Okay, hello, everybody. I am totally thrilled to bring to you Jasmin Joseph. Now, I want y'all to check out, she has two descriptors of who she is. Her fancy one on LinkedIn, her professional one, should I say, on LinkedIn is that she's a writer and researcher. She's written in Teen Vogue, Republic Journal, Yes Magazine, which is how I found her. She describes herself as a Black American woman of African, Native American, and European descent. Not many Black people will list all three of these ancestral lines as part of who they are. She also describes herself on her personal page as a 20-something mover, writer, tinkerer, explorer, and lover. I brought her here because I was fascinated by this article she wrote on Yes Magazine, and we'll say more about that after the interview gets started. But first, welcome, Jasmin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dean, for having me.
Just totally delighted to do that. So tell me, two things attracted me. First, this mover, shaker, 20-something, tinkerer, explorer, lover. Just give us an overview of how you came to be all of that and what that means in your everyday life.
Yeah, I actually don't even really remember when I wrote that. I think because I needed a bio for the website and everyone was like, write a bio, write a bio, write a bio. But I just didn't like the bio just like being a list of my accomplishments only, like, oh, I went to this school, I published in this place. So I kind of wanted to describe me like as a person, like who I am more than like what I've done. So I came up with those words, literally just thinking about what are the things I like to do. I like to tinker with ideas, explore places, love people. And that I feel like that's the origin of like all of my work anyway. So I think that's why I love that bio for myself. And I don't want to say how old I am, or I didn't want to say how old I was at the time, even though it was 23 when I wrote it.
Okay, cool. And you dance, you write, you paint, you draw.
Yeah, so I don't paint that often, sometimes, but I'm mostly a writer. I danced in college. I was a researcher. That's probably like my main skill that I've used to get jobs. But yeah, I've worked in different industries, political polling, banking, and all of my work, I feel like, is just trying to better connect with and understand people. So now I work in entertainment, and then I moonlight as a writer, producer.
Okay. So, how did you get interested in generational trauma?
I have it, first of all. So that was probably my original interest. But I started like part of actually the way that I am a little anxious or the way that anxiety manifests in my life is a desire to get information, which is again also why I'm a researcher, because whenever I think of something or something gets in my mind, to sort of anesthetize my fear, I try to learn as much about it as possible. So when I was advised, as I wrote in the article, to go seek out a psychiatrist, it kind of made me like obsessively kind of want to understand what he was accusing me of being wrong with me. Like, so I started looking into like anxiety, like physical manifestations of anxiety, what causes anxiety. And that sort of came to be like the arrow that everything was pointing to when I was like, why do I have this? What is wrong with me, etc. It was more like this directional pointing to there are other reasons why mental illness manifests in the ways that it does.
Well, okay. There's a lot to unpack here. So, so first, I just want to comment. A friend of mine told me once that whenever I want to get control of an anxiety, I go about understanding it. And I always said I have the best profession in the world because I was an academic and a social worker. So any problem I wanted to learn about, I could do it in the name of social work, and I could go to the library,
Right.
I could look it up, and then I could write about it. So,
Right.
it's always fun to meet a kindred a soul in that.
Of course.
Okay. So, what you alluded to, this something is wrong with me, something is wrong with me. So, you
Mm.
wrote, I found you through this article you wrote in Yes Magazine on healing generational trauma. And you wrote this very provocative sentence. My own mental health journey began with destigmatizing mental illness and eventually transformed into an acceptance of mental health care as an inextricable part of holistic wellness. Who told you you had a mental illness? And how did
Um,
you go from mental illness to destigmatizing mental illness?
yeah, so the first person that might have suggested it was actually an OBGYN. So I had to go to him for like, kind of like a checkup treatment after I like gone on vacation. And I was like so nervous about this appointment. I was just like so nervous. Like I don't think I told my mom I was going. And I was just like, oh my God, like I'm freaking out. So you know how they check your vitals when you go to the doctor, like they do your blood pressure, whatever. And my heart rate was like incredibly high. Like my heart was beating out of my chest. And then obviously the nurse wrote it down. The doctor looked at it and he was like, oh, do you have high blood pressure? And I was like, oh, no, I don't think so. And he was like, oh, because your heart rate is so high. And I was like, no, sorry. Yeah, I'm just nervous. This just happens to me. And he was like, you should see someone about that. Like, if this happens to you a lot, like, that's not good. And I was like, and no one had ever brought it up. I guess because I had never, I don't have general like white coat anxiety, they call it when you're nervous to see
Mhm.
the doctor.
I was just
Um,
thinking that.
yeah, no. So like it had never come up before, but I was just so nervous about this particular appointment that I was like that it manifested in a way that I get when I get nervous. Um so it was the first time anyone had like basically seen it because I always would be so composed. And he was like quite alarmed. Like I later looked it up of like the level of my like diastolic pressure or whatever it was, and it was like almost like it's like there's like a spectrum, and like here's like a heart attack. It was like here, like it was crazy high. Um, so that's why he was so nervous, and that's why actually he suggested I go straight to a psychiatrist and not a therapist first. But I was like, no, and I didn't even tell anyone anything like that. But then there was another incident that I had where I was like getting that same feeling, and I was like, okay, I think I need to like do something about this. If having this kind of reaction is not it's not good for me.
So, can I ask you some personal questions here?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Did you think of yourself as a generally nervous person, composed on the outside, nervous on the inside?
I didn't think myself as a nervous person because I think like even in my family, the language is always I was nervous. I got nervous. Like you're not yourself unless you're like a person that's like having nervous breakdowns, as we call them. I don't think I never thought of that as like a quality. So I was like, oh no, I get nervous, but I'm not a nervous person, you know?
Okay. So you weren't labeling as, so you thought getting nervous, it was a something that happens to you, not,
Right.
okay. Were you depressed, unhappy,
During the appointment or in general?
general?
No, I feel like I just didn't recognize, um, like, unless it was something very serious, like, I didn't recognize mental illness to be a condition. Like, I thought it, like, I recognized it as like a temporary state. So I was like, you can be depressed, you can be nervous, but like, that doesn't mean you're depressed, you're nervous. And I think that's a lot of like a common misconception a lot of people have is that, oh, if you're depressed, you'll always be depressed. Like you're a depressed person, like you stay
Okay.
depressed. Yeah.
Okay. So you weren't like, yeah, I have a friend, a couple of friends actually, who are clinically depressed.
Mm,
Something is wired in their brain. So,
right.
so they have to work to get out of that state. You're saying that's not what's true for you. Would you, in terms of your general emotional tone at that time, would you
Yeah.
describe yourself as just basically satisfied, basically happy?
Hmm. Yeah. So I was, again, I was 23 working a job I didn't really like. So I wasn't like
Oh,
satisfied, but I definitely would not have like thought back on it. Or I didn't feel in the moment that I was very depressed. But it was just kind of like I would be very triggered by certain situations. And that's when it would be like, oh, I feel depressed. I feel nervous right now. And that could last, a couple hours, it could last weeks. And that's what I would witness in my family as well. Like people would have a bad time and then it's like a few weeks they're feeling XY kind of way. So we never really, I think it was so pervasive that we never really were like, we're all depressed. Like it's like we all just get depressed sometimes. Like that's normal.
I
Like,
get that. Yeah.
yeah.
It's like a friend of mine who grew up poor said that her family talked about being broke sometimes. And it wasn't
Right.
until she was grown that she realized, hey, we were poor.
Right, exactly. It's that exact same thing where it's like if there's a pervasive state, like you only recognize deviations from whatever you've decided is your baseline.
Right. Okay. So you were generally okay as you defined yourself. You just knew you had these periods where you might go off your game
Mm,
and sink into whatever.
right.
Then do you mind saying what happened that you were so nervous about this particular appointment?
Oh yeah, no problem. Another thing I want to try to destigmatize. So I had to get I was getting like an STI test, like for like,
Oh,
all
yeah.
the sort of tests, that kind of thing. So I was nervous about that and I had never gotten one before. Um, so I was just kind of nervous about like what those results could hold, whatever. And again, like I was going in secret or whatever. So
Tip,
that's why
tip, tip.
I know. So I was like, even though I was by myself, like I felt like I was like kept keeping a secret from everyone when I went.
Yeah. Okay. So the secrecy compounded the nervousness. It's hard enough going for that test, right?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and then, so there's the embarrassment there. And
Right.
then,
Yeah.
right. And then now I have to keep it secret. I can't tell my mom. I can't tell anybody.
Right.
So by the time you show up, you're fit to be tied.
Yeah, exactly. So I was wound up when I arrived, clearly.
I can get that. Okay. So then he says, check it out. Maybe you should see a psychiatrist. And your reactions, what? Me?
Yeah, I was like, okay, no. I was really just like, I don't know what he's talking about. But I think what was important was that he planted this seed that was like, this reaction isn't normal. Like you could live without this kind of reaction to things that upset you or like make you a little bit uncertain. So then that was like when the next time I had one of those episodes, I was like, yeah, okay, if I could do without this, I would like to. So I'm
Whoa.
gonna try. Oh, no
So that's
problem.
what I was looking for. So you said, because see, you were at a fork. Some people would say that crazy doctor doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right,
You said, if I can live without this and do something about it, I will. What
right.
made you turn that way and not just dismiss it?
Um, I don't know. I think also because I sort of recognized that it was like holding me back a little. Like I typically like from up until that point, like I always worked through that nervousness, but it was always there. Like I would get stomach aches, my heart would be very fast. Pretty much any time I had to do almost anything, like, and it would range from like small to like when I was at the doctor that time, where it's like my heart's like beating like loudly pounding out of my chest, like after, after you run or something. So the fact that he said that, like, I had never considered that it was abnormal, I think. And when he brought it to my attention, after, I was like, okay, if I could change this, like I want to, or like I don't want to have to experience everything like this anymore. So the next time I had that sort of reaction, probably again related to dating, frankly, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to find a therapist. Because I didn't really want to go to a psychiatrist. I still didn't really know what those were. Like, I didn't know what they did. But I was like, okay, I'll look for a therapist.
Okay. I just find that just so fascinating. One of the things that continues to puzzle me is
Mm,
that moment where people decide to change rather than stay stuck.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
many people say those folks don't know what they're talking about. Nothing
Hmm.
can be done about it. I'm doomed. This is,
Hmm.
I can't, nothing. What made you willing to change, to investigate? Tell me about your
Um,
family. Tell me about your family or growing up.
yeah. So I had a great family. I had a great childhood. With some natural like bumps in the road, as we all have for the most part. But both my parents are African American. My dad is African American slash Caribbean American. So they were from the islands of St. Croix in the US Virgin Islands.
Hmm.
And my grandma was from the South, and she met my grandpa after having moved north to New York. So I think they kind of had my grandma had like a very upwardly mobile kind of worldview, in terms of like, she was like, I'm gonna go to school, I'm gonna make my own money, like that kind of thing. And I also find that's probably why she linked up with my grandfather, because like his family was like a little bit more established, like middle class. I don't think they had the experience of slavery in the US. They had it in the Caribbean. So they were sort of like middle class, or like that sort of Black emerging middle class for, a long time before a lot of Black Americans were able to sort of reach that level. And my mom's family was not the same. Like they were, umpteenth generation Americans in the South, out of slavery, who, she was the first generation that was out of the South. So she was born in the North. And I think like the combination of that, it just like obviously you can imagine, can manifest itself in many different ways, in terms of finances, like gender, power, even like intercultural sort of clashes between the Black American versus the Black non-Americans. Um, so all those things kind of like, as I got older, I learned more about them. And I was always interested, because I was like, what are we? Like everyone else has an ethnicity, like everyone else is like telling these colorful stories about where they're from, like who they are. And my parents would be like, you're just Black, you're just Black. Like, it was the worst. I just found it to be the worst, like most insufficient answer. I was like, there is no stories, there's no nothing. Like, just this, like, and also I was like, just slavery, like that sucks. So the more I learned about like what else could be, like what else that contained, I saw how like, oh my God, like, the experience of my grandfather dropping out of school, like, and not having learning how to read, and like what kind of pressure that put on, my mom and her younger siblings, like what kind of pressure it was to be, being upwardly mobile in a world where there is a glass ceiling that was saying, we don't want Black people in here, like we don't care what your qualifications are, and how frustrating that could be, like how difficult that could be, what vices you turn to when your life is that frustrating, and how those vices impact your children. And I think that's what really was like clicked for me when I was like, oh, this didn't start with me, like this isn't all my fault or all their fault.
Whoa. So you put it together in a flash.
Yeah, kind of like a galaxy brain moment. But
Yeah.
I think I was looking for someone to blame, and then I was like, oh, no one's to blame. And I think that's what I was afraid of, was that if I did this, everyone would start blaming one another. Like they would be like, what did we didn't do anything that you should feel like this. Like we did everything so you don't have to feel like this. Or it's like, I felt like this and I made sure that you didn't feel like this. So I did all this stuff. So how can you even say that you're feeling like something's lacking, like you have a reason to be depressed? So I think when I took that perspective, it was like, this is the perspective that I can get people on board with this. Like, it's not your fault, is the bottom line.
We didn't do it to ourselves.
Right. You didn't do it to yourself. So you didn't do it to you didn't do it to me. No, like someone didn't do it to you. Someone didn't do it to them. Like, so thwarting blame in this case is very useful.
Whoa, this is the first time I've heard someone break it down that way. Usually, people talk about generational trauma as something that they have to suffer through and their ancestors suffered through. And this
Right.
is just sort of my fate. And,
Right.
it's something that's smeared over me and nothing can happen. And
Mm.
you took the opposite. You said, hey, we get a pass. We get a
Yeah, it's
free
like you get a
pass.
right. And I think you get a pass, and also it's like, yeah, I think just not taking that view, like that, it's like nihilistic almost, like
Hmm.
very nihilistic, like it's impossible, like this is definitely gonna, this is the hand of cards we were dealt. So we just have to deal with it. And I think, yeah, it just kind of like, I think it helped me take like this like power over the situation, where it's like, yeah, there's trauma, but like there's also survival. Like all these people endured this, and like I'm still here. So that's there too.
Yeah. Okay. So sometimes I think when I feel sorry for myself, I think, oh, I have so many issues. I think, I wasn't run out of town by the KKK like one of my ancestors. So,
Right.
shut up and stop complaining and do what I have to do.
Exactly.
Okay. So let me recap what you said and you tell me what I'm missing.
Okay.
You grew up with half Caribbean, half Black South.
Hmm.
And those are two different cultures for those who don't understand that, because one, as you said, is descended from the slaves, it's a artifact of the slave society. And the other, most Caribbeans were sort of poor, but and certainly subject to colonialism, but were free. So were your Caribbean parents free? They were not enslaved.
So my grandparents, I think they were enslaved in the Caribbean. They were never enslaved in the US, was the difference. So I don't think they had the
Okay, it's
experience of slavery in the
yeah.
US.
The
Yeah.
Caribbean, describe this difference between Caribbean slavery and Southern Black slavery as you understand it.
I would say that there probably isn't like that big a difference other than like, location wise, but I think the fact that they didn't have the experience in the US, and that they came being able to be separate from that experience, or separate from like having been in the US pre-slavery, post-slavery, Reconstruction. There's just sort of a, how would I say it? I think there's sort of just like a difference, I think, in approach, because they don't have that, or occasionally they might not have that nihilistic worldview that might come as a result of having seen slavery, endured it, survived it, and emerged from it. Like a greater sense of like possibility if you were able to be mobile to come to America rather than be forced to America.
Oh, okay. So you're saying the immigrant experience is what
Yeah.
differentiated. Both sets were enslaved, but
Hmm.
one had the opportunity to come into the land of the free, even if
Right.
they, even if it wasn't free. They
Right.
still had
Correct.
the immigrant experience.
Right. Yeah. Or
And
they were more connected to that experience, I would say.
aha, yeah, because I know there are a lot of stats that show that people who come from the Caribbean here, they do better economically, educationally. They thrive more than those who've been here forever and
Right.
who've
Yeah.
through generation after generation started to lose hope. So
Right.
so that's what you're talking about. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, exactly.
Okay, so you grew up with that. You grew up in an upwardly mobile family, even if
Mhm.
even if they didn't have what they want. The
Right.
aspirations was upwardly mobile,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so you grew up believing I can do more. I can
Mm.
achieve more.
Yeah. I would say that's accurate.
Okay, so now here comes this doctor
Hmm.
telling you something's wrong with you,
Right.
and you have all of that to fall back on.
Right.
The history of a family that believes you can do something about your circumstances,
Right.
right? And then you have this creative power to turn a lemon into lemonade
Exactly.
so that you go and investigate generational trauma
Hmm.
and say, "Oh, this is bad, but this is also good."
Right.
I
I was like, this
love it.
is my problem indirectly.
I love it. Okay, so now we got there. So now here's the next step.
Hmm.
Realizing I need help and getting off my you know what
Hmm.
to make that phone call, to do the investigation, to learn. So tell us about that journey because a lot of people say, "Oh, one day I'm going to do such and such."
Right. Yeah. So I just went online and I searched Black woman therapist because I was like, I know I want to talk to a Black woman, like, period. I can't see myself talking to anyone else. Yeah. So then I found Therapy for Black Girls, the founder of which, Dr. Joy, I was able to talk to for the article. And they just have like a network of therapists, like you can put in your location and they can find them near you. They have like a picture, a bio. And yeah, you people do a lot of research. They meted like a lot of different ones, but when I was in New York, I went to basically the first one I thought I looked like I might be able to connect with. And I was with her for like a year and a half. And then I moved to California and did the same thing. And I found another Black woman therapist on that website, that I connected with out here. And I've been with her ever since. And yeah, like I feel like that's just really the main way to do it. Just search. The one thing was that I didn't like use insurance. So I'm like, I feel like I approach it where I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna concern myself with that until I get to that point. Because a lot of times they can be, I noticed a lot of them had sliding scales. Some people were open about accepting insurance, some people were not. Yeah, so I never let like the insurance part because it's just such a landmine to navigate. I just decided that I would try to find the one that I liked best and then try to stick with them in whatever way possible.
Okay. So you say you've been with her ever since. How long ago was this?
So I moved here in 2019. So it's been like 3 years that I've been meeting with this same therapist.
And you're still seeing her.
Yes, I am. I still see her.
Okay. This we're going to get to generational trauma because I'm going.
Yeah.
That's what attracted. But again, this is you're doing a service for all the folks who have thought about
Right.
therapy and haven't done it. So why did you stay so long? Let's go with
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people ask that. I think it's because there's like a lot of different things. And therapy, I think more than like solving specific problems, helps you like develop the strategies to deal with life. So, and also I've gone through a lot of change, like in those 3 times. Like I moved here, had a new job, quit a job, was dating this person, stopped dating the person. So I feel like I've had a lot of like constant change in my life anyway. So there was always material for her to like for us to discuss together. And I think like definitely depending on what your situation is, there's always a point where you can sort of like taper off, like do kind of like monthly check-ins, and like, sometimes you might be in crisis, need to meet every week. Yeah, it's just a matter of like what you think you need. Yeah, but to me, it's just like nice to have this space that I'm dedicated to being honest with myself, and like another person is there to give me like objective feedback.
Yes. Okay, so for readers, for listeners, I'm going to distinguish between therapy and coach because people know I do leadership coaching. So
Okay.
I'm going to tell my difference, and then you tell me if you agree with that, if you see it differently.
Okay.
The way I explain it is therapy is going back into your past
Hmm.
and uncovering the stuck parts there so that you can move forward.
Right.
Coaching is keeps a lens on the going forward, and you dip into the past as necessary to bring it up to help explain where you are now and what you need to be different to move forward.
Yeah, I
So
would agree.
you would agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I feel compelled to say it again. So therapy is about looking back to go forward. Coaching is about looking forward, dipping back when you need to. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said there was a lot of fertile ground that to go back to
Hmm.
and to bring out. So was it in therapy that you discovered generational trauma, or was it in your reading or some combination?
It was a combination. It was both therapy, reading, and also like slowly as I got older, my parents started to kind of open up more to me about their history and like stories from their life and experiences. And I think like when you're, my age, you're like a younger person, you're talking to your parents and they tell you stuff in the like in the age we grew up in, they tell a passing story and it's like, yeah, that's horrible. Like, I'm incredibly sorry that happened to you. Like, if no one has said that, like, that shouldn't have happened. That wasn't normal. Like, it's okay to be upset by that. Which is what a lot of people haven't heard, which is why there's like this belief where it's like, this just happens. Like, that's a part of life. And it's like, okay, but it doesn't have to be. It actually shouldn't be. Like, we should very much work that it's not a part of anyone's life anymore. So I think the combination of those things, and when I would like sort of try to like unpack with my therapist certain things, it made me like, she would basically help me connect these dots of like, oh, if they had that experience, when you do blah blah blah, that's why they react blah 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 kind of way.
Can you think of any concrete example to illustrate that?
um let me see. I mean, I can do like a abstract one without exposing too much. So I think
Sure.
one might be, for example, if like a lot of people have left someone's lives, and either because they were moving, there was like an experience of incarceration. So they felt like people often abandoned them. So if you try to like, you're just trying to do something like for yourself, you just want to go on vacation, you just want to study in a different country, you just want to move, they take it as something personal, like you're choosing to leave them. And then they, might not be supportive. You think that your parent isn't supportive. And like, that's how those things kind of continue. And it's like, they're just reacting to an experience they had. Um, and you like, and the knowledge of that can help you sort of reassure them, like, this is temporary, like, I'm not leaving because I want to get away from everyone, or like everything moves in cycles. Like, this isn't permanent. Like, small things like that can change the way someone reacts to a stimulus or something that you're telling them. And I think that's what and then the way that those interactions affect relationships are the things that are what create these sort of tensions in our relationships with one another, especially within families, but also kind of in, all relationships.
Okay, so let me translate and tell me if I got it. Let's imagine that someone in your previous generation, parents, aunt, someone, grandparent, someone experienced the trauma of being separated from someone they loved.
Correct.
Fast forward a generation, and now here you are, and you want to go off and live your life and explore
Correct.
new things.
Correct.
They still have the ungrieved loss.
Mm.
And so now you're leaving, they experience it as something personal, a personal hurt,
Right.
because it's been unprocessed.
Right.
Is that
Exactly.
the essence of what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so now how does that, their history and their ungrieved loss, affect you and what you have to do to be whole and healed?
Yeah, woo, big question that I'm still learning to answer every day. I think it's just that you have to recognize where that comes from, the reactions that they have, and try to address them head on. But at the same time, not let that stop you from living your life. Which is very hard, especially for oldest daughters. Like, and I think the immigrant experience across ethnicities is very similar to the Black experience in that sense, where, there's sort of like people are afraid of things that they like don't even consciously realize that they're afraid of. So it's manifesting in like can be argumentative or like unsupportive behaviors or aggressive behaviors. Um, so yeah, I just think we need to be like a little more understanding of one another. And yeah, but again, still do what you want to do.
Okay, so let me translate, and I'm doing this partially on my own experience.
Yeah,
So there's guilt,
there's a lot of guilt.
there is responsibility,
There is.
there is the legacy that the family has instilled in us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to confront that and try to learn to distinguish when and what is what I'm doing healthy and when
Mm-hmm.
and is what I'm doing escapism.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yep, that's totally accurate. That's almost too accurate.
It's not unusual.
Right.
It's not unusual. I still remember a woman in my class whose family came here from Venezuela, and she had
Mm-hmm.
been raised to be following her mother's footsteps of being at home and raising children and
Mm-hmm.
catering to the men in her life, her brother and father's whims. And now she's in a graduate school of social work. She's out of college, which was heresy, and she's in a graduate school of social work, getting her master's. And
Right.
she learns about feminism, she learns about empowerment, and then she goes home, and her brother expects her to wait on him.
Mm-hmm.
So she had to figure it out.
Yeah, that's another thing. is quite hard about this process is that there's a lot of jealousy too when these curses are broken, because you think, I suffer this way, you should suffer this way too. I mean, even myself, like the generation beneath me, like I see, like, they have a type of freedom I didn't have when I was like 14. Like they know about therapy when they're like 10 or 12, so that they can go into high school and have a, much better experience than me. Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, obviously, like I think everyone will feel that jealousy, but it's about like you have to have this, like you said, a forward thinking view where this will be better, for people after. And I'm like, okay, if I have another life, like I'll just make up for lost time in my next life.
Okay, so I want to show the chart that you
For
developed
sure.
that was on the in Yes magazine. And
Okay, I did not develop this. This was actually from a piece of research
oh,
that
it's
was
oh
like,
okay. You did not develop it. Okay,
yeah,
well, you can still talk us through it. It's a great
correct.
chart.
Yes. So this graph, I love this chart. I love this research. Let me give you the name. It was by Kermeyer and others, a 2014 psychological paper. Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. So this chart was actually adapted from a psychological paper from 2014 by Kermeyer and others. And it's showing the transgenerational transmission of historical trauma. So in my essay particularly, and also sort of what we're talking about, is this idea of a historical trauma, meaning that something has happened on a population level to a group of people, and then that experience is what's being passed from generation to generation. So historical trauma in this case was referring to Native Americans in the US. So as a result of settler colonialism by Europeans, there was like a loss of collective identity. There was a genocide. So like many people that spoke native languages were killed in this genocide. So some languages were totally lost because the speakers were wiped out by sickness. As a result, you can lose a whole generation of children either to mental illness, or like mental illness that then escalates into suicide. And then the cultural implications of negative labeling and stereotyping. There are these associations with these kind of people, limits your opportunities, limits economic opportunity. And then how does that affect the family? Like there's grief, like you said, that goes unprocessed. There's anger at the world that then, is then shown only to the people that you have in your immediate area. So men are angry they cannot provide the way they think they're supposed to. Women are angry that they don't have the life they think they want for their children. And then as a result, it's family dysfunction, abuse, domestic violence. And then how does this affect these family dynamics affect the individual people, individual children, all because of this one historical traumatic event. And then the continuing to live through the impacts of this historical event, like throughout those generations as well. So this also talks a little bit about like epigenetic regulation, which, like, not to get too into the science, basically is about the expression of genes. So genes that can be expressed in a different way, and that way that they're expressed is passed on. So that's what a lot of the sort of newer research about the genetic implications of trauma have pointed to, where it's not that the DNA itself has changed, but like something attaches itself to the DNA that changes the way that it's presented. And in theory, that can be reversed. But work has to be done on the part of the individual, both like spiritually or like internally / often medically with like treatment.
Okay, so I want to tease out the epigenetic because some people may not understand that.
For
So,
sure.
so let's take sickle cell. I know
Mm,
some teenagers whose mother homeschooled them, get ground up the flour to make the bread. I mean, she just did. She was extremely holistic. Chose a
right.
community. They chose a community where sickle cell was not as problematic there. And these kids have grown up getting ready to go to college. Sickle cell anemia, the full-fledged disease, and they've never had a crisis. I think one had one crisis, but that's because that's the propensity to have it is there, the gene is there, but the expression of the gene, the epigenetic expression, has not happened.
I actually don't think that applies to sickle cell.
That's interesting.
Or I couldn't actually, I couldn't accurately say. I would have to look that up or ask a scientist, because I actually was thinking about including a bit on sickle cell that later got that later was removed from the paper. But interestingly that you bring that up, because sickle cell basically is a genetic adaptation that is from Africa. So it shapes your blood cells so that you're less likely to contract malaria.
Right.
So obviously, when slaves were brought to the US, they had this trait, and then they started eating a diet that was incredibly that didn't work well with that adaptation, for lack of a better word. So, a diet that's heavy in fat is not good for people, or, fat and butter is not good for people that have narrower blood vessels. And these narrow blood vessels are to help prevent, diseases that one would get in Africa. So now the people are moved here and they have this adaptation that's misplaced now. Like it doesn't work anymore in the environment that they've been placed in. So I think that's also why I was going to include that sickle cell was a unique case. So similarly with mental illness, it's like the paranoia of living under Reconstruction era South, living with the KKK as an adult, and then moving to the South where that threat is no longer there. That paranoia, it probably just doesn't go away because you move to a better neighborhood, that kind of paranoia. So that is then translated with, overprotectiveness, like over punishing your children because you have this paranoia that used to exist of what would happen if you didn't discipline them. The world would discipline them when that threat no longer exists. So I think that's a good way to look at how we can see how the impact of trauma, even in like a non-genetic way, can continue.
Okay, so let me distinguish what I meant by sickle cell. I meant having a physical crisis where you have to be hospitalized. As a genetic illness, they still have the illness. That did not go away.
Okay, yeah.
But the expression of that illness through a sickle crisis that warrants hospitalization.
Right.
That's what was protected by nutrition, by health, by environment, by making sure that build up the kid's immune system.
Right. Got it.
Okay, so I agree with you. What you said about the narrowing of the vessels was something I'd never heard about. And I'm very glad to hear that. And
yeah,
that's very interesting to me. And what you're saying about the paranoia from the paranoia of growing up with the KKK, how that trauma can be passed down in terms of overprotectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So the parent grows up under the KKK, as my parents did, for an example. They grow up, they end up being overprotective, or in my case, underprotective, because my parents did not want me to grow up with fear.
Okay.
Right? So they flipped to this other end. How does that, now coming down to you, how does that overprotectiveness affect you, over or under, whichever way it went for you?
Right. Yeah. So I think for me, it would definitely be over, or overprotectiveness rather. And yeah, how it looks is that, you like, if let's say I have an idea, like I said, I'm like explorer type, tinkerer type. So I'm always trying to go places, do things. And sometimes it feels, I can feel unsupportive, or like I can feel unsupported rather. So it's like, that's not because they don't support me or don't think that I can do whatever I want to do. It's just this sort of fear of what could happen if I'm, if I'm going out and doing all these different things.
Got
Um,
it.
yeah.
That's cool. I'm glad you explained that.
Thank you for giving me the space to.
Wrapping it up now. Thank you. This has been a great explanation. If what is there one thing you want people of your generation to understand about generational trauma?
I would say that even if you understand it and recognize it, like you don't have to be defined by it. And I don't think it should be like a limiting thing or a way out of accountability for your actions, anything like that. Um, it's more, and especially now that there's like this increasing cultural awareness of it, like it's apparent in media, it's a theme in media. Um, so as a result, I think that, working through it should be something that is, like you said, just like future oriented. Like, how can we make this world better for even the generations beyond the ones that you might be, closely connected to? There's like a Native American teaching of like seventh generational thinking. So 7 generations into the future. What would your life look like without this trauma? And I think that's sort of what I would like to. I think that was the thing that I thought of that one time. I was like, what would my life look like without
Oh,
this? I want to look like that.
say that question again. I interrupted you and I want everybody to hear it. It's a great question.
I
What
said,
would,
what would my life look like without this trauma? And that's what I wanted to strive toward.
Jasmin Joseph, thank you for a terrific interview.
Thank you so much
It's,
for having me. I love this conversation.
I got the answer to my question. What was it about Jasmine that led her to seek therapeutic help when she realized she could benefit from it rather than deny it or procrastinate or just stay stuck? Well, here's the answer. As she grew older, she heard stories from her family about what they went through in the Caribbean islands and the Black South. Even though her family experienced racial trauma, they didn't believe that was the way things should be. She explained that the stories she heard about what her family had to endure, which were horrible, yet they didn't sink into learned helplessness or think that nothing could ever change for them. In her words, her family was upwardly mobile. They wanted better lives and they wanted to be able to do something about it. In other words, she was the beneficiary of a family that didn't give up. I was so tickled to hear that the idea of racial trauma was actually a relief to her. For her, it meant that her personal traumas were not her family's fault or her fault. No one in her family was to blame. Feeling off the hook and letting them off the hook was part of what she gained from therapy and her own research about it. Instead of internalizing her upsetness or what she called nervousness, she learned this was something put on her by generations past, and she didn't have to get stuck in it. She could get out. This is what she did and continues to do in therapy. She has the freedom to choose how she wants to be in the world. Helping people learn they have the freedom to choose how they want to be in the world is a passion of mine. Thanks to Jasmin for that insight, and thanks to you for listening.